I learned what rock bottom smelled like on a Thursday morning in February, on my knees in someone else's bathroom, scrubbing grout with a toothbrush I'd bought at the dollar store. Bleach, artificial lemon, the faint stomach-turning sweetness of mildew that no amount of product could ever fully kill. My own sweat, cheap and sour because I couldn't afford the deodorant I used to buy before everything fell apart. And underneath it all, the particular scent of humiliation that has no name, but that every woman who's ever worked a job she's overqualified for knows by heart. The marble was cold even through my jeans, maternity jeans actually, that I still wore 3 years after I'd needed them, because they were the only ones I owned that didn't cut into my stomach when I crouched like this for hours at a time. The knees were nearly worn through. I'd patched them twice with iron-on denim squares that didn't quite match. You could see the edges if you looked closely. I tried very hard not to look closely at anything anymore. The apartment belonged to someone who made more in a month than I used to make in a year when I was a teacher. Before the divorce, before David emptied our joint account and left me with $47,000 in credit card debt I didn't know existed, and a 4-year-old son who still asked why Daddy didn't live with us anymore. I didn't know the owner's name. The agency just sent me addresses and door codes and instructions on what needed cleaning. This particular bathroom had heated floors and a soaking tub that could fit 4 people, and a shower head that probably cost more than my current monthly rent. The toothbrush I was using to scrub the tile cost $1. I'd bought a pack of 6 because it was cheaper that way. This was the second one. The bristles were already flattening. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I sat back on my heels, peeling off the yellow rubber gloves that were too big for my hands, and checked the screen. "Rachel, you're working 3 houses today?" I typed back with pruned fingers. 4. I need $800 by Friday, or we're out. The ellipsis appeared immediately, then disappeared. Then appeared again. Finally, "Claire, you can't keep doing this." I didn't respond. I pulled the gloves back on. The thing about cleaning other people's homes is that you learn exactly how much your life is worth in comparative terms. This bathroom was worth approximately 4 months of my rent. The towels hanging on the heated rack were worth a week of groceries. The silver soap dispenser by the sink was worth the copay I couldn't afford when Oliver had an ear infection last month, and I'd waited 3 days too long to take him to urgent care because I kept hoping it would get better on its own. It didn't get better on its own. Nothing ever did. I finished the grout at 9:47 a.m., which meant I had 13 minutes to get to the next house in Midtown before my 10:30 start time, and the subway from the Upper East Side took at least 40 minutes if the trains were running on schedule. They were never running on schedule. I was going to be late, again. The agency had already warned me twice. I packed my supplies into the canvas bag I carried everywhere now, the one with the broken zipper that I held shut with a safety pin. Checked every room twice to make sure I hadn't left anything behind. I'd learned that lesson the hard way when I'd left my wallet in a client's kitchen and had to go back for it, and the agency docked my pay for the extra time. The door locked behind me with the kind of solid, expensive click that cheap doors never make. Outside, February in New York was the kind of cold that found every gap in your coat and every hole in your boots and settled into your bones like it planned to stay until April. My coat was from a thrift store in Queens, wool blend that was probably nice once, before someone else wore it for 5 winters and then decided it wasn't good enough anymore. The lining was ripped under the left arm. I kept meaning to sew it. I kept not having time. I walked the 12 blocks to the subway because I couldn't afford the bus and the trains were underground where at least the wind couldn't reach. My hands were still pink and raw from the cleaning chemicals. I should have been wearing better gloves. The good ones cost $18 at the supply store. I bought the $4 ones instead and told myself it didn't matter. My phone buzzed again as I swiped through the turnstile. "Rachel, I'm serious. You're going to collapse." I typed back, "I'm fine." The train was delayed. "Truck maintenance," the loudspeaker said, with the kind of staticky indifference that told you this happened so often it wasn't even worth apologizing for anymore. I stood on the platform with my bag at my feet and my phone in my hand, and absolutely nothing left in my chest that felt remotely like hope. 6 months ago, I was a teacher. I had a classroom with posters of literary quotes on the walls, and a coffee mug that said, "I teach, therefore I drink," that the juniors gave me for Christmas. I assigned essays on The Great Gatsby and graded them on Sunday mornings, while Oliver watched cartoons and David made pancakes in the kitchen. 6 months ago, I didn't know that my husband was sleeping with the receptionist at his real estate. State office. I didn't know that he'd been taking cash advances on our credit cards and hiding the statements. I didn't know that when I finally found the statements, when I finally saw the charges from hotels I'd never been to and restaurants we'd never eaten at together, and I confronted him in our kitchen on a Tuesday night after Oliver was asleep, he would look at me like I was the problem for bringing it up. I didn't know he'd already hired a lawyer. I didn't know that no-fault divorce meant he could leave and take half of everything, even though he was the one who broke us. And that community debt meant I was responsible for credit cards I never used. I didn't know I'd lose my job 3 weeks later when the school district cut the budget and I was the last hire, so I was the first gone. I didn't know a lot of things. The train finally came. I got to the Midtown house 17 minutes late. The agency called while I was scrubbing the kitchen floor and told me this was my last warning. I said I understood. I always said I understood. By 6 p.m. I'd cleaned 4 apartments, earned $240 before taxes, and missed the window to pick up Oliver from the municipal daycare by 20 minutes. They charged $1 per minute after 6:15. I handed over $20 I didn't have and carried my son to the car that was one missed payment away from repossession. He was quiet in the back seat. Too quiet. He'd been too quiet for months now. At home, our apartment in Queens smelled like the mold growing behind the bathroom wall that the landlord refused to fix. The heat was uneven. The radiator clanked and hissed and only worked in the living room, so we both slept on the pull-out couch most nights. There was a water stain on the ceiling, shaped like a continent I couldn't name. I stared at it most nights when I couldn't sleep, which was almost every night now. I made Oliver dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets from the freezer and let him watch TV while I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and applied for jobs I wouldn't get. Administrative assistant, receptionist, data entry clerk. They all required experience I didn't have, or references I couldn't provide, because the school district had let me go so quietly it felt like I'd never been there at all. Rachel texted again at 10:30. You didn't answer me. I typed, I'm fine, really. Oliver fell asleep on the couch at 11. I carried him to the pull-out bed, tucked him in with the blanket his grandmother made before she died, and sat in the kitchen with the lights off and my bank account open on my phone. $340. The rent was due in 6 days. I was $800 short. I opened my email. There was a message from the agency with next week's schedule. 3 houses, not 4. They were cutting my hours. Put my head in my hands. Did not cry, because crying didn't pay rent. My phone buzzed one more time. Rachel, just call him. I didn't answer. I didn't know who she was talking about, and even if I did, I wouldn't have called. I didn't take charity. I didn't take help I hadn't earned. I took care of my son and I paid my rent, and I survived, because that's what you did when there was no other option. I went to bed at midnight and woke up at 5:30 to do it all over again. That was my life now. That was rock bottom. I just didn't know yet how much further I still had to fall. The humiliation happened on a Saturday afternoon in a Whole Foods on the Upper West Side, under fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly ill, in front of at least 24 witnesses who would absolutely remember. I was there because Oliver needed milk and bread, and because the bodega near our apartment charged twice as much for half the quality. I'd learned to calculate cost per ounce in my head while standing in grocery store aisles, learned to buy the store brand of everything, learned that organic was a luxury I couldn't pretend to afford anymore, even though I used to be the kind of mother who bought organic. I had exactly $43 in my wallet. Milk, bread, bananas, and peanut butter. That was the list. Nothing else. Oliver was holding my hand, talking about a dinosaur book his teacher had read at daycare. Something about a pterodactyl that could fly higher than clouds. He was wearing the winter coat I bought at a consignment sale, navy blue, with a small stain on the sleeve that I'd scrubbed until my knuckles ached, but never fully came out. I saw David before he saw me. He was in the produce section, holding a bag of organic apples, wearing a jacket I didn't recognize. Beside him was Amber, the receptionist, the woman he'd left me for. She was 6 months pregnant now, wearing yoga pants that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget, and a cream-colored sweater that looked soft even from a distance. I made the decision in half a second. Turn around, leave, go to a different store, but Oliver had already seen him. Daddy. He pulled his hand from mine and ran before I could stop him. Across the produce section, sneakers squeaking on the polished floor, crashing into David's legs, with the kind of wholehearted enthusiasm that only 4-year-olds possess, the kind that doesn't yet understand that love can be conditional. David looked down, then up. His eyes met mine across 15 feet of overpriced organic vegetables, and I watched him do the same calculation I'd just done. The same decision. Except he didn't choose to leave. Amber turned, saw Oliver, saw me, and smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "Oh," she said, loud enough that the woman selecting avocados 3 feet away looked up. "You must be Oliver's mom." I walked over because there was nothing else to do. My hand was already reaching for Oliver's shoulder, already preparing to extract him from this situation as quickly and quietly as possible. "Hi, buddy," David said, but he was looking at me, and his expression was the one he used to wear when I asked about the credit card statements. Caught. Guilty. Resentful that I'd made him feel guilty. "Say hi to your dad, Oliver," I said, keeping my voice even. "We need to finish shopping." "David talks about you sometimes," Amber continued as if I hadn't spoken. She shifted the shopping basket on her arm. It was full of things I recognized from my old life. Almond butter, quinoa, the expensive yogurt with the French name. "It's so brave of you, working as a maid. I could never do that kind of work, but I guess we all do what we have to, right?" The woman with the avocados was definitely listening now. So was the man stocking lettuce. So was the teenage employee collecting abandoned carts. "We should go," I said quietly, hand tightening on Oliver's shoulder. "Daddy, can I come to your house?" Oliver asked, looking up at David with the kind of hope that made my chest physically hurt. "You said maybe this weekend." David opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Amber. She answered for him. "Oh, sweetie, your daddy and I are getting the nursery ready this weekend, for your new baby sister. But maybe next time." There wasn't going to be a next time. I knew it. David knew it. Maybe even Oliver knew it. Somewhere in the part of children that understands things they can't articulate yet. "Come on, Oliver," I said. "But I want to stay with Daddy." His voice was rising now, edging toward the whine that preceded tears. "Mommy, I want to stay." "Oliver," firmer now. "David mentioned you're behind on some of the paperwork for the child support modifications," Amber said, examining a bundle of organic kale like it was the most interesting thing in the world. "He said his lawyer's been trying to reach you. You know, if you spent a little less on—" She glanced at my cart, at the store-brand milk, and the regular bananas, and the peanut butter that wasn't almond butter. "Well, maybe you'd have more time to handle those things." My cart had $17 worth of groceries in it. Hers had at least 80. "We're leaving," I said. I reached for Oliver's hand. He pulled away. "I don't want to leave. I want to stay with Daddy." "Oliver, now." My voice was shaking. I hated that there were now at least 6 people watching this. I hated that my son was choosing this moment, this place, to fall apart. "Why can't I live with Daddy?" Oliver's face was red now, tears starting. "Why do I have to live with you? You're always tired and you never play with me, and Daddy has the big TV and the toy room, and he's not sad all the time." The produce section had gone very, very quiet. I crouched down, trying to keep my hands steady, trying to pull Oliver toward me. He resisted, twisting away, and I heard my knee crack against the floor, heard the seam in my jeans finally give way completely. "Sweetheart, please. I hate you," he screamed. "I want Daddy." David didn't say anything. He just stood there, holding his bag of organic apples, looking at the floor. Amber pulled out her phone. I saw her do it, watched her angle it just slightly toward us, watched her thumb move across the screen. She was filming. Something broke in my chest. Not my heart. That had broken months ago. Something smaller and deeper, the last little piece of pride I'd been carrying around like it mattered. I picked Oliver up. He was screaming, hitting my shoulder with his small fists, crying so hard he could barely breathe. I left the cart exactly where it was. $17 of groceries I suddenly couldn't afford to buy, even if I'd wanted to. And I carried my son through the produce section, past the dairy aisle, past the checkout lanes where every single cashier was staring. Someone whispered. I didn't hear the words, but I heard the tone. Pity. Judgment. The particular kind of schadenfreude that people feel when they witness someone else's life falling apart in public and feel grateful it isn't theirs. The automatic doors opened. Cold air hit my face. Oliver was still crying, but quieter now, the kind of exhausted sobbing that comes after a child has screamed themselves empty. I made it to the car, strapped him into his booster seat. His face was splotchy and red and covered in tears and snot, and he wouldn't look at me. I got into the driver's seat, closed the door, sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, and absolutely nothing left inside me that knew what to do next. Oliver's crying slowed, hiccuped, stopped. In the rearview mirror, I watched him wipe his face with his sleeve. "Mommy?" His voice was so small. I couldn't answer. If I opened my mouth, something would come out that I wouldn't be able to take back. "Mommy, why don't you buy me toys like Daddy does?" I stared at the steering wheel, at my hands, red and raw from chemicals. Nails bitten to the quick because I couldn't afford manicures anymore, and I chewed them without thinking when I was stressed, which was always. "Mommy?" I started the car. I drove home in silence, and Oliver didn't ask again. And when we got back to the apartment with no groceries and no milk and no bread, I put on a movie for him and locked myself in the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub and did not cry. I didn't cry because if I started, I wouldn't stop. I sat there until my legs went numb, until Oliver knocked on the door and asked if I was okay, until I could put my face back together into something that resembled a mother who had any idea what she was doing. "I'm fine, baby," I called through the door. "I'll be right out." I looked at myself in the mirror. The reflection looking back was a stranger. Thin face, circles under the eyes, hair that needed cutting, the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. I went back out into the living room, made Oliver a peanut butter sandwich with the last of the bread we had left, sat with him on the couch and watched dinosaurs save the world, and pretended that everything was fine. 2 days later, the agency sent me to a new address on the Upper East Side, an apartment I'd never cleaned before. The door code worked. I let myself in. The place was silent, enormous, and so far removed from my life that it felt like stepping onto a different planet. I didn't know yet that the owner had requested me specifically. I didn't know yet that he'd seen everything. 3 days later, I stood in an apartment that cost more than I would earn in a lifetime, holding a letter I didn't understand, written in handwriting I didn't recognize. The agency had sent me the address that morning, with a note. New client, high priority, thorough clean required. The door code had been included. No name. That wasn't unusual. Most of my clients were anonymous, just addresses and instructions, and the occasional passive-aggressive note about missed spots or products they preferred. This apartment was different. It wasn't just wealthy. Wealth I'd seen before. In all the homes I cleaned. In all the bathrooms with heated floors and kitchens with appliances I couldn't name. This was something else. This was power. You could feel it in the weight of the silence, in the way every surface gleamed like it had been chosen specifically to communicate that the person who lived here didn't worry about things like cost or practicality or whether the marble countertops were excessive. The living room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. The furniture was leather and wood and metal. All clean lines and expensive simplicity. There were bookshelves filled with hardcover editions that looked read, not decorative. A bar cart with bottles I recognized from restaurants I used to go to before my life fell apart. Art on the walls that was probably original. I was supposed to clean the second floor. The instructions had been specific. Office, bedroom, ensuite bathroom. I'd started with the office. It was smaller than I'd expected, tucked into the corner of the second floor, with windows facing east. There was a desk made of dark wood, so polished I could see my reflection in it. A leather chair, a lamp with a green glass shade, shelves lined with books and binders, and a few framed photographs I didn't look at too closely, because that felt invasive. On the desk, there were papers. I wasn't supposed to touch papers. That was a rule the agency had made very clear. Clean around documents, never move them, never read them. I'd followed that rule in every house I'd worked in for 6 months. But one of the papers was a letter, handwritten, on heavy crane stationery that felt expensive even from a distance. And it was sitting directly on top of the desk, positioned in a way that seemed almost deliberate, like someone had left it there specifically to be seen. I told myself I was imagining things. I picked it up to move it aside so I could dust underneath. The handwriting was precise, controlled, the kind of penmanship that people didn't have anymore, that belonged to a different generation or a different kind of education. It said, "You deserve more than this." That was all. No signature, no date, no context. I set it down exactly where I'd found it, cleaned around it, dusted the desk, the shelves, the windowsill, vacuumed the rug, moved to the bedroom, but I kept thinking about the letter. You deserve more than this. Who was it for? Why was it unfinished? And why did those 6 words feel like they'd been written directly to me, even though that was impossible, even though I'd never been to this apartment before and the owner didn't know I existed? I was cleaning the ensuite bathroom, scrubbing the grout with the kind of meditative focus that kept me from thinking too much, When I heard the front door open, I froze. The instructions hadn't mentioned anyone being home. Most clients left before I arrived, came back after I was gone. That was the implicit arrangement. I cleaned their lives, and they pretended I didn't exist. State. Footsteps. Heavy. Slow. Moving through the first floor. Then voices. 2 of them. Men. Speaking in a language I didn't understand, but recognized. Italian. My heart was beating too fast. I looked around the bathroom, calculating. I couldn't leave without going past the staircase. I couldn't hide. That would be worse if they found me. The only option was to finish as quickly as possible and hope they stayed downstairs. I kept scrubbing. The voices stopped. The footsteps moved to the stairs. I stood up, peeling off my gloves, grabbing my supply bag. If I could just get to the hallway, explain that the agency had sent me, apologize for the intrusion. I stepped out of the bathroom, directly into someone's chest. I stumbled back, looked up. The man standing in the hallway was taller than anyone I'd ever stood this close to. At least 6'2", maybe more. He was wearing a suit that fit him the way suits fit people in magazines. Dark gray with a subtle pattern, perfectly tailored across shoulders that seemed almost too broad to be real. His hair was black, with silver threading through the temples. His jaw was sharp enough to cut glass, with a thin scar along the underside of his chin that somehow made him more attractive instead of less. But it was his eyes that made me forget how to breathe. Dark brown, almost black, looking at me like he'd been expecting me, like he knew exactly who I was. "You're Claire," he said. Not a question, a statement. His voice was low, quiet, with the kind of controlled calm that made you understand immediately that this was a man who didn't need to raise his voice to be obeyed. I couldn't speak. My brain was trying to process too many things at once. How he knew my name, why he was here, whether I was about to lose this job like I'd lost everything else. Yes, I managed. "I'm sorry, I didn't know anyone would be home," the agency said. "You found the letter." I blinked. "What?" "The letter on my desk." He said it like it was obvious, like we both knew exactly what he was talking about. "You found it." My mouth opened. Closed. I didn't read it. I moved it to clean, but I didn't. I wasn't trying to. I left it for you. The hallway tilted slightly. Or maybe that was just me. "I don't understand," I said. He didn't move, didn't blink. Just watched me with those dark, unreadable eyes, standing close enough that I could smell him. Bergamot and something richer. Leather maybe, or wood. Something that belonged in expensive stores I no longer entered. "3 days ago," he said. "Whole Foods, Upper West Side. You were in the parking lot. You were crying." Everything inside me went cold. "I saw you," he continued, still in that same quiet, factual tone. "I recognized you." "You," my voice cracked. "You were there?" "I was leaving a meeting nearby. I saw you carrying your son to your car. I saw what happened inside." He paused. "I saw her filming you." Oh God. Someone had seen. Someone had watched the worst moment of my life, and I hadn't even known. And now he was standing here telling me about it, like it was just information, like it didn't make me want to disappear into the floor. "The agency sent your profile weeks ago," he said, "when I requested a new cleaning service. Your photo was included. I recognized your face in the parking lot." I couldn't breathe properly. "So you what? You requested me specifically?" "Yes." "Why?" For the first time something shifted in his expression. Not quite emotion, but something close to it. "Because you looked like someone who needed help," he said simply. "And I have the resources to provide it." "I don't need," I started. Automatic, the same defense I'd used with Rachel, with the social worker at Oliver's daycare, with everyone who'd looked at me with pity over the past 6 months. "Yes," he interrupted, "you do." The certainty in his voice made me angry. Which was better than afraid. Better than humiliated. "You don't know anything about me," I said. "I know you're working 4 houses a day and still can't pay rent. I know your ex-husband left you with his debt. I know you're taking care of a 4-year-old alone. I know you haven't bought yourself new glasses even though the ones you're wearing are broken." His eyes flicked to the frame, to the crack in the left temple I'd been ignoring for 2 months. "I know you deserve more than cleaning my bathroom." "Stop saying that," I whispered. "It's true. You don't get to decide what I deserve." "No," he agreed, "but I can decide who I employ." I stared at him, at this stranger in his perfect suit, in his perfect apartment who thought he could fix my life because he'd witnessed one bad day. "I don't want your charity," I said. It's not charity, it's a job. I already have jobs. Not like this one. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a business card, heavy cardstock, cream-colored with text in dark embossed ink. He held it out to me. I didn't take it. $4,000 a week, he said. You'll work here. For me. Cleaning, organizing, and occasional translation work when I need correspondence reviewed. An apartment in this building is included. You and your son. $4,000. I made less than that in a month. Me moan I can trust in my home. And because you need stability. You don't even know me. I know enough. He was still holding the card. I still wasn't taking it. This is insane, I said. You can't just offer people jobs because you saw them crying in a parking lot. I can do whatever I want, he said, with the kind of quiet certainty that came from a lifetime of being right. The question is whether you're too proud to accept. Yes, I wanted to say, I am. I'm too proud and too afraid, and too aware that nothing in life is actually free, and that men who offer help always want something in return. But I thought about the rent I couldn't pay, about Oliver asking why I didn't buy him toys, about the agency cutting my hours, about the electricity bill, and the broken heater, and the mold behind the bathroom wall. I thought about the letter on his desk. You deserve more than this. I need to think about it, I said. He nodded once, set the card on the hallway table beside me. When you're ready, he said. Then he turned and walked down the stairs, footsteps steady and unhurried, like he'd already won, and we both knew it. I stood there for a long time after he left, staring at the business card. Matteo D. Caruso, it read. Below the name, in smaller print, Caruso International Holdings. Below that, handwritten in the same precise script as the letter, a phone number. I picked it up, put it in my pocket. I told myself I'd throw it away later. I didn't. 3 weeks later, I was still carrying the card in my wallet, like evidence of a crime I hadn't committed yet. I'd taken it out 17 times, put it back 18. The edges were starting to soften from handling, the embossed letters slightly less sharp than they'd been, when Mateo Caruso had handed it to me in his hallway, with the kind of certainty that made me want to prove him wrong. I hadn't called. I'd gone back to my 4 houses a day, except the agency had cut me down to 3, then 2. Budget adjustments, they said. Nothing personal. Everything was always nothing personal right before it destroyed your life. I was making $1,900 a month now. Rent was $1,700. That left $200 for everything else. Food, utilities, gas, daycare, the medical bills I was still paying off in $10 increments, the credit card minimums that never seemed to shrink, no matter how much I paid. The math didn't work. It hadn't worked in weeks. Rachel knew. She'd stopped asking if I was okay and started asking when I was going to do something about it, which was worse because it meant she'd moved from concern to the stage where she was watching me drown and preparing to say she'd warned me. Just call him, she said for the 4th time in 2 weeks. Sitting across from me, in the diner where we met for coffee I could no longer afford, but ordered anyway, because refusing would mean admitting I'd reached that point. I don't take handouts from strangers, I said. He's offering you a job, Claire. That's not a handout. It's a job that doesn't make sense. Why would he pay me $4,000 a week to clean his apartment? He could hire an entire service for that. Maybe he likes you. He doesn't know me. He knows enough to offer you $4,000 a week. I stirred my coffee. It had gone cold 10 minutes ago. I was drinking it anyway. There's always a catch, I said quietly. Rachel sighed. Not every man is David. I know that. Do you? I didn't answer. We sat in silence for a while, the diner noise filling the space between us, dishes clattering, conversations overlapping, the hiss of the espresso machine behind the counter. Finally Rachel said, "What's the worst that could happen?" I could have given her a list. I'd been making lists in my head for 3 weeks, cataloging every possible way that accepting Mateo Caruso's offer could go wrong. But before I could answer, my phone buzzed on the table between us. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, it buzzed again. Text message. I picked it up. The message said, "This is David's attorney. We need to discuss custody arrangements. Please call at your earliest convenience." My hands went cold. "What is it?" Rachel asked. I showed her the screen. She read it twice. "He can't actually take Oliver from you. You're his mother." "He can try," I said. My voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. "If he can prove I'm not providing a stable environment." "You're providing. I'm 3 weeks behind on rent, Rachel. I'm working 2 houses a day, and I still can't keep the lights on. Oliver's daycare called yesterday because I missed last month's payment. If David's lawyer puts me in front of a judge, and asks me to prove I can take care of my son. What exactly am I supposed to say? Rachel didn't answer. I put the phone face down on the table, tried to breathe normally, failed. Call Caruso, Rachel said. I can't. Yes, you can. You're just too stubborn. I'm not. You'd rather lose everything than accept help, and I love you, but that's not noble. That's just stupid. I looked at her. She looked back, unflinching. Call him, she said again, or I will. She wouldn't, but the fact that she'd said it meant she was serious, and Rachel was only serious when things were worse than I was admitting to myself. I went home, put Oliver to bed, sat on the couch in the dark with my phone in my hand and Matteo Caruso's business card on the coffee table in front of me. The apartment was quiet except for the radiator and the distant sound of someone's TV through the two thin walls. Oliver was asleep in the pull-out bed, small and trusting and completely unaware that his mother had no idea how to keep him safe. I picked up the card, put it down, picked it up again. The number was handwritten. That felt important somehow, though I couldn't articulate why. Like he'd taken the time to write it himself instead of having it printed, like he'd expected me to meet it. It was 11:47 p.m. Normal people didn't call it 11:47 p.m., but Matteo Caruso hadn't seemed like a normal person, and I was far past the point where normal rules applied to my life. I dialed before I could change my mind. He answered on the second ring. Claire. Not a question, like he'd been waiting, like he'd known I'd call eventually and had simply been patient enough to let me come to the decision on my own. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Are you all right? He asked. His voice was exactly as I remembered, low, calm, with an undertone of command that made you want to answer honestly, even when honesty was the last thing you wanted to give. No, I said. Silence. Not empty silence, the kind that felt deliberate, like he was giving me space to continue. I need help, I said. The words tasted like failure. I know, he said simply. Send me your address. I'll be there in 20 minutes. It's almost midnight. 18 minutes now. You don't have to, Claire. He said my name like a full sentence. Send me the address. He hung up. I sat there with the phone in my hand, heart beating too fast, brain trying to process what I'd just done. Then I typed out my address and hit send before I could talk myself out of it. 16 minutes later, I was standing at the window, watching the street, when a black SUV pulled up in front of my building. It was the kind of vehicle that didn't belong in this neighborhood. Too new, too expensive. The windows were tinted dark enough that I couldn't see inside, but I knew it was him. The driver's side door opened. Mateo got out. No driver, no entourage, just him, alone, wearing the same kind of perfectly tailored suit he'd worn the day we met, looking completely out of place on my street with its cracked sidewalks and overflowing trash bins and general air of exhausted survival. He looked up. I don't know how he knew which window was mine. There were 12 apartments in the building, all with identical windows, half of them lit at this hour, but his eyes found mine immediately, with the same unsettling precision he'd had when he'd recognized me in his hallway. I stepped back from the window, grabbed my keys, went downstairs before I could overthink it. He was waiting by the SUV when I came out, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. Thank you for coming, I said. It came out more formal than I'd intended, like we were in a business meeting instead of standing on a street in Queens at midnight. Show me the letter, he said. I'd brought my phone. I pulled up the text from David's attorney and handed it to him without a word. He read it once, then again. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. When did you receive this? He asked. 4 hours ago. He handed the phone back. How much time did they give you to respond? 10 days. And do you have a lawyer? No, I called 3 last week. They all want $15,000 just to start. He nodded once, like this confirms something he'd already suspected. Then he pulled out his own phone and made a call. At midnight, on a Saturday. Someone answered immediately. He spoke in Italian. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the tone. Absolute authority. Zero room for negotiation. The conversation lasted maybe 90 seconds. He ended the call and looked at me. My attorney will handle it, he said. You'll have full custody by the end of the month. I stared at him. You can't possibly know that. Yes, I can. David has money. He has lawyers. I have more. He said it without arrogance, just fact. And his lawyer will realize very quickly that pursuing this case is a mistake. I can't pay you back for. You'll work for me, he interrupted. That's the payment. The offer I made 3 weeks ago is still open. $4,000 a week. Apartment included. You start Monday. Monday. 3 days from now. I haven't even agreed yet, I said. You called me at midnight. You've agreed. He was right. We both knew it. I need to know what you want from me, I said. Really want. Because in my experience, men don't offer help like this without expecting something in return. Something shifted in his expression. Not anger, something colder. I'm not your ex-husband, he said quietly. I know that. Do you? It was the same thing Rachel had asked me 6 hours ago. Apparently everyone could see my damage except me. What I want, Mateo continued, is someone I can trust in my home. Someone intelligent enough to handle correspondence I can't waste time on, and observant enough to. Oh, notice details that matter. What I want is to not worry about whether my household is managed properly because I'm too busy managing everything else. What I want is to help someone who deserves it and is too proud to ask. He paused. Is that clear enough? That's a lot of wants for someone you met once, I said. I'm a good judge of character. Or a terrible one. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close. Monday, he said again. 9 a.m., my building. I'll have the apartment ready. He pulled out another business card, wrote something on the back, handed it to me. This is the address. Top floor access code is on the back. I took it. What if I don't show up? You will. The certainty in his voice should have been irritating. Instead, it felt like the first solid ground I'd stood on in months. Okay, I said. He nodded, got back in the SUV, started the engine. Then he rolled down the window. Claire. I looked at him. Stop punishing yourself, he said. Nothing that happened to you was your fault. He drove away before I could respond. I stood on the sidewalk holding his business card and trying to remember the last time someone had said something to me that felt true. I couldn't. Monday morning at 9 a.m., I stood in front of Matteo Caruso's building with 2 suitcases containing everything Oliver and I owned that mattered, trying to convince myself this wasn't a mistake. The building was exactly what I should have expected. Pre-war architecture, limestone facade, a doorman in an actual uniform who looked at me like he was calculating whether I belonged there. I didn't. We both knew it. I'm here to see Matteo Caruso, I said, holding up the business card like credentials. The doorman's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. Recognition. Maybe respect. Top floor, he said, and opened the door without asking my name. The lobby had marble floors and crown molding and the kind of silence that only existed in places where people paid extra for it. The elevator was the old-fashioned kind, with brass fixtures and a mirror that showed me exactly how out of place I looked. Jeans from a thrift store, coat with the torn lining, Oliver's hand gripping mine so tight, his knuckles were white. Is this where we're going to live? He asked quietly as the elevator climbed. Maybe, I said. We'll see. The elevator opened directly into an apartment. Not a hallway, not a landing. The apartment itself. Like the entire top floor belonged to one person, and that person didn't believe in sharing elevator access with neighbors. Matteo was standing in what I assumed was the living room, talking on his phone in Italian. He saw us, held up one finger in a wait gesture, and finished his conversation in 3 more sentences. He hung up, looked at Oliver, then at me. You brought everything? He asked. Your apartment is 1 floor down. I'll show you. Wait, I said. Don't we need to discuss terms, responsibilities, what exactly you're expecting from me? We will, after you've settled. He was already walking toward the elevator. Come. It wasn't a request. We rode down 1 floor in silence. Oliver pressed against my leg, staring at Mateo with the kind of wide-eyed attention children give to adults they can't quite figure out yet. The elevator opened. Mateo led us down a hallway to a door at the end, pulled out a key, and handed it to me. It's yours, he said. I unlocked the door. The apartment was twice the size of the place we'd left. Hardwood floors, windows that actually let in light, a kitchen with appliances that looked like they'd been installed this decade. 2 bedrooms, a bathroom without mold. And in the smaller bedroom, there was a bed shaped like a dinosaur. Oliver made a sound I'd never heard from him before, somewhere between a gasp and a laugh. He looked up at me. Is that mine? I looked at Mateo. He was watching Oliver with an expression I couldn't read. How did you? I started. You mentioned he liked dinosaurs, Mateo said, when you were on the phone Saturday night. In the background. I hadn't realized he'd heard that. I hadn't realized he'd been paying that much attention. Oliver let go of my hand and walked toward the bed like he was approaching something sacred. He touched the headboard, carefully, reverently. Can I really sleep here? Yes, I said, before I could think about whether I was ready to commit to this, to all of this, to whatever arrangement I'd just walked into. Oliver climbed onto the bed, lay down, stared at the ceiling with an expression of pure joy that made my chest hurt. "Thank you," I said quietly to Matteo. He didn't respond, just walked back to the living room, expecting me to follow. I did. "You'll start today," he said when we were alone. "I need correspondence reviewed for a shipment arriving Thursday. The files are upstairs in my office. You'll also manage the household calendar, coordinate with my assistant for scheduling, and handle any translation work that comes up." "Translation from what language?" "Italian to English. Contracts mostly. Sometimes personal correspondence." "I don't speak Italian." "You don't need to. I'll provide translations. You'll make sure the English sounds natural, not like it came from a translator." I nodded slowly. "And cleaning?" "Once a week. Thursday mornings. The rest of the time, focus on the correspondence." He paused. "You're overqualified for cleaning. I'd rather use you for work that actually requires your skills." "You don't know what my skills are." "You were a teacher. Literature. You assigned essays on The Great Gatsby." He said it like he was reading from a file, which he probably was. "You have a degree in English from NYU. You graduated summa cum laude. You're wasting your time scrubbing grout." The fact that he'd researched me should have been alarming. Instead, it felt oddly reassuring, like at least he'd made an informed decision before upending my entire life. "What else do you know about me?" I asked. "Enough." He checked his watch. "I have a meeting at 10. Make yourself comfortable. The kitchen is stocked. If you need anything, my number is on the card." He was halfway to the door when someone else walked in. A woman, mid-30s, dark hair, expensive clothes, carrying herself with the kind of casual confidence that came from never having to worry about being somewhere she didn't belong. She stopped when she saw me, looked me over with the thoroughness of someone conducting an appraisal. "You must be Claire," she said. I nodded. She turned to Mateo. "You didn't mention she was moving in today." "I didn't mention a lot of things," he said. The woman smiled. It wasn't unkind, but it wasn't exactly warm either. "I'm Sophia, Mateo's sister. I manage the family's properties, which means I'll be seeing you around." "Nice to meet you," I said automatically. Sophia walked closer, studied me with the same intensity Mateo had, like she could read my entire history in my face. "You're the one he wrote letters to." I blinked. "What?" "He hasn't done that since our mother died." She glanced at Mateo. "So whatever you did, it mattered." "Sophia," Mateo said. A warning. "What? I'm being nice." She looked back at me. "How much did he tell you about the job?" "Just that I'll be handling correspondence and translation work." "And you believed that's all there is to it?" "Sophia," Mateo said again, sharper this time. She held up her hands. "Fine, I'm leaving." But she stopped at the door and turned back to me. "Advice. Don't let him intimidate you. He does that to everyone. It's a control thing." "I don't intimidate people," Mateo said. "You absolutely do." She smiled at me. "Welcome to the family, Claire." Then she was gone. I looked at Mateo. "Family?" "She's dramatic," he said. "Ignore half of what she says." "Which half?" The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "I have to go. If Oliver needs anything, call me." He left before I could ask any of the dozen questions building in my throat. I stood alone in the apartment that was apparently mine now, listening to Oliver play in the other room, trying to figure out what exactly I'd just agreed to. The rest of the day passed in a strange blur. I unpacked our 2 suitcases, made lunch from the kitchen that was somehow fully stocked with food I actually ate, which meant Mateo had either guessed or researched that too. Explored the apartment carefully, half expecting to find some catch, some hidden camera, or unreasonable demand that would explain why any of this was happening. I didn't find anything. At 3 p.m., I went upstairs to Mateo's apartment with Oliver. The office was where I remembered. 2nd floor, corner room, windows facing east. There was a desk, not the one I'd cleaned before, a second one, set up in the corner with a laptop and a stack of files. A note on top, in that same precise handwriting. Start with the top 3. Due Thursday. I sat down, opened the first file. It was exactly what he'd said. A contract for imported wine, translated from Italian to English, with all the grammatical stiffness of machine translation. My job was to make it sound human. I could do that. I'd spent years teaching students how to make their writing sound natural. This was the same skill, different application. I worked for 2 hours, while Oliver watched a movie on the couch Mateo had apparently bought just for this purpose. At 5 p.m., I heard the elevator. Mateo came into the office carrying 2 bags of takeout. "You haven't eaten," he said. "How do you know that?" "You never eat lunch. You told Rachel that 3 weeks ago. I assume the pattern hasn't changed." He'd heard that too. On the phone, in the background. He set the bags on the desk. "Italian, the restaurant downstairs. I ordered extra for Oliver." "You don't have to feed us," I said. "I'm aware." He pulled out containers. "But you won't eat unless someone makes you. And you're no use to me if you collapse from malnutrition." It should have sounded cold. It didn't. It sounded practical, which somehow made it easier to accept. Oliver appeared in the doorway, drawn by the smell of food. He looked at Mateo shyly. "Are you hungry?" Mateo asked him. Oliver nodded. "Do you like pasta?" "Yes." Mateo handed him a container. "There's a table downstairs in your apartment. Go eat." Oliver looked at me for permission. I nodded. He left, carefully carrying the pasta like it was treasure. "You're good with him," I said. "Was," Mateo said. "I know how to talk to children." He started to leave, stopped, turned back. "The glasses you're wearing," he said. "They're broken." I touched the frame self-consciously. "I know, I'll replace them when. There's a pair on your desk downstairs. I had them made. Same prescription." I stared at him. "How do you know my prescription?" "You left your old pair in my bathroom 3 weeks ago. I had the lenses checked." Of course he had. I didn't know how to finish the sentence. "Efficient," he supplied. "I don't waste time on problems that have simple solutions." He left. I sat there for a long moment, looking at the food he'd brought, thinking about the apartment and the bed shaped like a dinosaur, and the glasses I hadn't asked for but apparently needed. Thinking about the way he'd said we're family, when his sister had made the same claim. Thinking that maybe, possibly, I'd made the right choice after all. By the 3rd week, I'd stopped questioning whether the coffee on my desk each morning was a coincidence. It appeared every day at exactly 8:30 a.m., while I was getting Oliver ready for his new school. The private one with security, that Mateo had enrolled him in without asking. The one that cost more per month than I used to make in 3. The coffee was always the exact temperature I preferred, with the precise amount of cream I'd never told anyone I used. Mateo claimed he made it while passing through the kitchen. I'd never seen him pass through any kitchen at 8:30 in the morning. "He's watching you," Rachel said when she visited at the end of week 3. She was standing in my new apartment, our new apartment, looking around with the expression of someone trying to reconcile reality with expectation. "You know that, right?" "He's observant," I said. "Claire, he knows how you take your coffee. Men don't know that unless they're paying attention." "He's my employer. Employers don't buy their employees' children dinosaur beds." She had a point. But I'd stopped trying to categorize what Matteo Caruso was to me, because every time I settled on a definition, he did something that contradicted it. Employers didn't teach your son to count in Italian while reviewing shipping manifests. Employers didn't replace your broken laptop without mentioning it, leaving the new one on your desk like it had always been there. Employers didn't appear at your door at 9 p.m. with Thai food because you'd worked through dinner again, setting it down with nothing more than eat, before disappearing back upstairs. A month later I'd fallen into a rhythm I hadn't known I was capable of anymore. Morning. Get Oliver ready. Walk him to the car service Mateo had arranged. Another thing he'd simply decided was happening. Then work on correspondence until noon. Lunch appeared whether I asked for it or not. Usually carried up by Mateo himself, with the excuse that he was already eating and had ordered extra. He always ordered extra. Afternoons were translation work, turning stiff Italian business language into something that sounded natural in English. I was good at it. Better than I'd expected. Mateo had been right about that. I was wasted cleaning bathrooms. Evenings, Oliver and I ate dinner in our apartment, and sometimes Mateo joined us, sitting at my small kitchen table, like it was normal for a man who owned half the building to eat pasta with a 4-year-old, who asked him approximately 600 questions per meal. "Why do you talk different sometimes?" Oliver asked one night, twirling spaghetti on his fork with the concentration of a surgeon. "Different how?" Mateo asked. "Like, not English words." "That's Italian. It's the language my mother spoke." "Where is your mother?" "She died when I was young." Oliver considered this seriously. "Like how Mommy says my grandma died." "Yes." "That's sad." "Yes," Mateo agreed. "It is." Oliver went back to his pasta. The conversation was over for him, the way childhood grief worked. Acknowledged and then released, because he didn't yet have the capacity to hold on to it. But I saw something shift in Mateo's expression. Something that looked almost like surprise, like he hadn't expected a 4-year-old to understand. That night, after Oliver was asleep, I went upstairs to return files I'd finished reviewing. Mateo was in his office, door open, sitting at his desk with a pen in his hand and paper in front of him. He was writing. He looked up when I entered. "You're still working." "So are you." "I'm always working." I set the files on the corner of his desk, glanced at the paper. The handwriting was the same as the letter I'd found weeks ago. Precise, controlled, oddly beautiful. "You write letters," I said. "Sometimes." "To who?" He set down the pen. "No one usually. It's a habit. My mother taught me. She said writing things down made them permanent." "What are you making permanent tonight?" He didn't answer immediately. Then, thoughts I don't know what to do with. I should have left. It was late and this felt too personal, too much like crossing a line I hadn't been invited to cross. Instead I asked, "Does it help?" "Sometimes." He paused. "It helped when I wrote to you." My heart did something complicated in my chest. To know me? No, but I recognized something. He looked at me properly now, with that unsettling directness he had. "You look like someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen." The truth of it hit harder than it should have. "I should go," I said quietly. He nodded, but as I reached the door, he said, "Claire." I turned. "You're doing good work," he said. "Better than I expected." It shouldn't have mattered as much as it did. 2 months in, Sophia invited us to dinner. "Family thing," she'd said, when she stopped by the apartment unannounced, the way she'd started doing once a week. "Sunday, 6 p.m., my place, bring Oliver." "I don't think," I started. "Mateo already said you're coming." "He did?" "Yes, which means he told my husband you're coming. Which means I had to find out from my husband instead of my brother, which is annoying but typical." She smiled. "Wear something else. My kids will want to impress Oliver with their toys." She left before I could argue. Sunday at 6 p.m. I stood in Sophia's living room in Brooklyn, watching Oliver play with her 2 sons while approximately 15 members of the Caruso family talked over each other in a mix of English and Italian. I'd met some of them before. Sophia's husband Marco, their Aunt Valentina who ran a bakery in Staten Island, a cousin whose name I'd already forgotten. But seeing them all together was different. Overwhelming. The kind of loud, affectionate chaos that came from people who genuinely liked each other. My family had never been like this. Mateo appeared at my elbow with a glass of wine I hadn't asked for, but definitely needed. "They're a lot," he said. "They're wonderful." Something in his expression softened. "Yes, they are." Dinner was loud and long and involved more food than should have been physically possible. Oliver sat between Sophia's sons, laughing at something I couldn't hear, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. At one point, Aunt Valentina, a woman in her 70s with opinions about everything, leaned across the table and said to me in heavily accented English, "You're good for him." "I'm sorry," I said. "Mateo." She gestured vaguely in his direction. He was across the room, holding Sophia's youngest, a baby who'd fallen asleep on his shoulder. "He smiles now. Before you, no smiles." "I'm just his employee," I said automatically. Valentina laughed. "No, Cara, you're not." Before I could respond, Sophia appeared and steered her aunt toward the kitchen with an apologetic look in my direction. But later, when I was helping clean up, Sophia cornered me by the sink. "He talks about you constantly," she said quietly. "What?" "To Marco, to me, to anyone who'll listen, which is new because Mateo doesn't talk about anyone. Last week, he spent 20 minutes explaining why the coffee vendor near his office wasn't good enough anymore, because they don't make it the way you like it." I didn't know what to do with that information. "I'm not," I started. "I know, you're not together. You're his employee. You've made that very clear." Sophia smiled. "But you should know. He doesn't let people into his life, ever. And you're in it. So is Oliver. That means something." That night, back in the apartment, I put Oliver to bed and sat in the living room, trying to process the entire evening. My phone buzzed. "Mateo, thank you for coming tonight." "Me. Thank you for inviting us." "Mateo, Sophia's pleased. She's been asking me to bring someone to dinner for years." "Me. I'm not someone." The typing indicator appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Mateo, no, you're not." I stared at the message for a long time, trying to figure out what he meant. 3 months in, Oliver had a nightmare. I heard him crying through the wall at 2 a.m., stumbled into his room still half asleep, and found him sitting up in the dinosaur bed, with tears streaming down his face. "Mommy," he sobbed. "I dreamed Daddy took me away, and you couldn't find me." I held him, rocked him, sang the lullaby my mother used to sing to me, the one I barely remembered the words to, but hummed anyway, because the melody was enough. He wouldn't stop crying, wouldn't calm down. 20 minutes in, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Then a knock. I opened the door. Mateo was standing there in a t-shirt and dark pants, hair slightly messed, like he'd been sleeping, which meant he'd heard Oliver crying from a floor above and had come down. "Is he all right?" he asked. "Nightmare. He can't calm down." Mateo looked past me to where Oliver was still hiccuping with sobs on the bed. "May I?" I nodded. He walked into Oliver's room, sat on the edge of the bed, and started singing. It was Italian, soft and low, and heartbreakingly gentle. A lullaby, I realized, the same one his mother must have sung to him. Oliver's crying slowed, then stopped. He leaned against Mateo's side, eyes drooping, breath evening out. By the third verse, he was asleep. Mateo stayed completely still for another 2 minutes, making sure Oliver wouldn't wake. Then he carefully shifted him back onto the pillow, pulled the blanket up, and stood. We walked to the door together in silence. In the hallway, I whispered, "Thank you." "It's nothing." "It's not nothing," kegged at me. We were standing too close, close enough that I could see the exhaustion in his face, the fine lines around his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well either. "If you need me," he said quietly, "call, always. It's 2 a.m. I don't care what time it is." He left before I could respond. I stood in the hallway for a long time after, listening to his footsteps fade, trying to remember when I'd stopped being afraid of meeting someone. 4 months in, I cut my hand. Paper cut, nothing serious, but deep enough that blood dripped onto the desk before I noticed. I was reaching for a tissue when Mateo appeared, because of course he did, because he always seemed to know when something was wrong. He didn't ask, just took my hand, examined the cut, and led me to the bathroom. He cleaned it carefully, applied antibiotic ointment, wrapped it with a bandage from the first aid kit he kept stocked for reasons that were becoming increasingly clear. He held my hand for 5 seconds longer than necessary. Neither of us moved. "You should be more careful," he said finally. "It's just a paper cut." Still, he let go, left the bathroom, left me standing there with my heart beating too fast and the phantom warmth of his hand still wrapped around mine. That night, alone in my apartment, I finally admitted what I'd been avoiding for months. I was falling for Matteo Caruso, and I had absolutely no idea what to do about it. The envelope was slipped under my door on a Friday morning, while Oliver and I were eating breakfast. I almost missed it. Would have if Oliver hadn't pointed and said, "Mommy, what's that?" Plain manila, no markings, no return address. I picked it up with the vague unease that came from months of learning that unmarked things were rarely good news. Inside was a photograph. Oliver, leaving his school, taken from across the street, zoomed in enough that I could see his backpack, his jacket, the dinosaur keychain hanging from the zipper. My hands went cold. I flipped it over, on the back in printed letters. "Caruso protects what isn't his." I must have made a sound, because Oliver looked up from his cereal. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, baby." My voice came out steady through sheer force of will. "Finish eating. We need to go upstairs." "To see Teo?" "Yes." I'd started letting Oliver call him that a month ago. Mateo had never corrected it. If anything, he seemed to prefer it to the formal distance of his full name. I got Oliver dressed, brought him upstairs, knocked on Mateo's door at 7:45 in the morning. He opened it immediately, already dressed in a suit, phone in hand like he'd been in the middle of something important. He took one look at my face and set the phone down. "What happened?" I handed him the envelope, went completely still in a way that was somehow more frightening than any visible anger would have been. "When did you receive this?" His voice was quiet. Too quiet. 10 minutes ago, it was under my door." He flipped it over, read the message. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. He spoke in Italian, low, controlled, but with an edge of command that made it clear this wasn't a request. The conversation lasted maybe 30 seconds. He hung up, made another call, then another. By the 4th call, I'd counted at least 15 men being mobilized to locations I didn't understand, for purposes he didn't explain. He switched to English for the 5th call. "I need security on the school. Now, 2 inside, 4 perimeter. No one gets within 100 feet of the building without clearance." He listened to whoever was on the other end. "I don't care what it costs. Do it." He ended the call, looked at me. "Pack a bag for Oliver," he said. "Clothes for 3 days. Favorite toys. Do it now." "What's happening?" "I'm moving him to a different school. Private. Security vetted. It's already arranged." "You can't just..." "Yes, I can." He said it with the same absolute certainty he'd used when he'd told me I'd have custody of Oliver. Like the world rearranged itself around his decisions, because it had learned that arguing was pointless. Pack the bag, Claire. I did. 20 minutes later, Oliver was in a car with two men I'd never met before, being driven to a school I'd never seen, and I was standing in Mateo's living room, trying to process what had just happened. Who sent the photo? I asked. Mateo was at the window, phone pressed to his ear, speaking Italian again. He held up one finger, finished the conversation, hung up. Russian organization, he said. Bratva. They want territory I control. What territory? He looked at me for a long moment, then, sit down. I don't want to sit down. I want to know why someone is threatening my son. Because they're threatening me, and they've correctly identified that you and Oliver are the fastest way to accomplish that. The words hung in the air between us. What exactly do you do, Mateo? I asked quietly. He'd told me import-export, legitimate business. I'd chosen to believe it because believing was easier than asking questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. I control shipping routes through 3 East Coast ports. D. Legitimate cargo, mostly. Wine, olive oil, textiles. But the routes themselves are valuable. Other organizations want access. I don't give it to them. And the illegitimate cargo? I don't move drugs. I don't move weapons. But I don't ask detailed questions about every container that passes through. And sometimes that means things move that shouldn't. He said it without inflection, without excuse. That's the business. You're telling me you're actually… Yes. He cut me off before I could finish the sentence. I am. I sat down after all. The Bratva approached me 6 months ago, he continued. Wanted partnership. I refused. They've been applying pressure since then. Small things at first. Vandalism to shipments, legal complaints. Nothing that couldn't be handled. He paused. This is the first time they've made it personal. So they know about me, about Oliver. Yes. Because I live here. Because I work for you. Because you're important to me, he corrected quietly. And they did their research well enough to understand that. My heart was beating too fast. You should have told me. Would you have stayed if I had? I didn't answer, because we both knew the truth. I'm giving you a choice now, Mateo said. I can move you. New city, new name if you want it. $500,000, offshore account. You and Oliver will be protected, but from a distance. You'll be safe. You're sending me away. I'm giving you the option to leave. That's not the same thing. No, he agreed. It's not. I looked at him. At this man who'd pulled me out of the lowest point of my life. Who'd given me work that used my brain instead of destroying my body. Who'd taught my son to count in Italian and made sure I ate lunch and somehow knew exactly how I took my coffee. This man who was apparently more dangerous than I'd let myself acknowledge. If I stay, I said, I need to know everything. Not to protect myself, to protect Oliver. No more half-truths, no more convenient omissions. If you stay, there's no going back, Mateo said. My world doesn't let people leave once they're in it. Then stop trying to make me leave. Something shifted in his expression. Relief maybe, or something close to it. All right, he said. We spent the next 2 hours in his office, while he explained exactly what his business entailed, who his enemies were, and what measures were already in place to protect the building. By the time he finished, I understood 3 things very clearly. 1. Matteo Caruso was significantly more powerful than I'd realized. 2. The danger was real but manageable, as long as certain precautions were taken. 3. He'd been protecting me since the day I'd moved in, and I'd been too naive to notice. How long has there been security on this building? I asked. Since you arrived. The doorman? Armed. Former military. The car service for Oliver? Bulletproof vehicle. Vetted driver. I should have been angry that he hadn't told me. Instead, I felt something closer to awe at the sheer scope of his planning. You've been preparing for this, I said. I'm always preparing, he said simply. It's how you survive. That evening, Oliver safely installed in his new school, with enough security to protect a head of state. I sat in my apartment trying to process everything I'd learned. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered without thinking. Ms. Ashford. The voice was male, accented, calm. You should tell Mr. Caruso that his protection is inadequate. My blood went cold. Who is this? Someone who wants you to understand that your son is not as safe as you believe. The line went dead. I ran upstairs. Burst into Mateo's apartment without knocking. He was in the living room with 4 men I recognized as security, all of them armed, and he took one look at my face and dismissed them with a gesture. What happened? I told him about the call. His expression went absolutely flat. What number? I showed him my phone. He took it, forwarded the number to someone, then made 3 calls in rapid succession. By the end of the 3rd, his voice had taken on an edge I'd never heard before. Find them, he said in English, clearly for my benefit. I don't care how, find them tonight. He hung up, looked at me. Pack a bag. You're staying upstairs until this is resolved. Mateo, this isn't a request, Claire. There was something in his voice that made arguing impossible. Not anger, something colder, more dangerous. I packed a bag. An hour later I was sitting on Mateo's couch while he worked his phone with the focused intensity of someone coordinating a military operation, which, I was beginning to understand, wasn't far from the truth. At 11 p.m. he got a call, answered, listened, said 3 words in Italian, and hung up. They found the location, he said. I'm going. What location? Where the calls are coming from. He was already putting on his jacket, checking something at his waistband that I realized with a jolt was a gun. You can't just... Yes, I can. He looked at me. Stay here. Lock the door behind me. If anyone comes in who isn't me or my security, there's a panic button under the kitchen counter. Press it. Mateo, this is insane. This is my world, without apology. And you're in it now, which means I protect you, no matter what that requires. He left. I sat on his couch in the dark, listening to the silence of the empty apartment, trying not to think about what protecting me might actually require. He came back 3 hours later. I heard the elevator, stood up, watched him walk through the door. There was blood on his collar, a cut on his cheekbone. His jacket was torn at the shoulder, but he was alive. It's handled, he said quietly. I crossed the room, took his face in my hands, examined the cut. You're hurt. It's nothing. It's not nothing. He caught my wrists gently. Claire. I looked up at him, at this man who'd just done something I probably didn't want to know the details of, who was standing in his living room at 2 a.m, with blood on his clothes because someone had threatened me. I'm not afraid of you, I said. You should be. I'm not. His hands were still on my wrists. His eyes were searching mine for something I wasn't sure I knew how to give. Come here, I said quietly. I led him to the bathroom, made him sit on the edge of the tub. Got a washcloth, warm water, the first aid kit from under the sink. I cleaned the blood from his face, from his hands, from the scrapes on his knuckles that suggested whatever had happened tonight had been physical and immediate, and probably brutal. He didn't flinch, just watched me with that steady, unreadable gaze. When I finished, he caught my hand. If something had happened to you, he started. It didn't. But if it had, Mateo, I said his name the way he sometimes said mine, like a complete sentence. He pulled me closer, not forcefully, just enough that I was standing between his knees, his hands resting lightly on my hips, looking up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Vulnerable. That was the word. He looked vulnerable. I need you to understand, he said quietly, that this won't be the last time. There will always be threats, always be danger. That's the cost of my life. I know. And you're still here. And still here. He closed his eyes, leaned forward until his forehead rested against my stomach. I put my hands in his hair, felt him breathe. We stayed like that for a long time, in the bathroom, in the silence, in the space between what we'd been and what we were becoming. Finally he stood, pulled me against him properly, arms around me like he was trying to convince himself I was real. Stay tonight, he said into my hair. Please. Okay. We went to his bedroom. He gave me a shirt to sleep in. We lay down in the dark, not touching, both of us staring at the ceiling. Then his hand found mine. I'm not going anywhere, I whispered. His grip tightened, and for the first time in months, possibly years, I fell asleep feeling completely safe. I woke up in Mateo's bed, with his arm draped over my waist, and morning light filtering through curtains we'd forgotten to close the night before. This had become normal, expected. The shape my life had taken when I'd stopped fighting what we were and simply let myself exist in it. Mateo was already awake. He always woke before me, spending the first hour of every morning reading beside me while I slept. I'd caught him at it enough times to recognize the pattern. Him propped against the headboard with a book or his phone, his free hand resting in my hair or on my shoulder, like he needed the physical confirmation that I was still there. You're staring, I murmured, without opening my eyes. You're awake. Your fault. How is it my fault? You breathed too loudly. His chest moved with silent laughter. I'll work on that. I opened my eyes. He was looking at me with the expression he'd started wearing, sometime in the past few months, the one that Sophia claimed made him look almost human. Soft, unguarded, the face he apparently only showed to me and Oliver. What time is it? I asked. 7. Oliver's going to come looking for us in approximately 10 minutes. I know, I can hear him moving around downstairs. Of course he could. Mateo heard everything, Noticed everything. It had stopped being unsettling and started being comforting somewhere around the time I'd realized he used that awareness to take care of the people he loved. That he loved me was no longer a question. He'd never said it out loud, neither had I. But it existed between us in every coffee that appeared on my desk, every time he pulled me against him in the middle of the night like he was trying to prevent me from disappearing. Every conversation that started with him asking what I needed before I'd figured out how to ask. "Did you sleep?" I asked, because he still didn't. Not well, not consistently. Some. Liar. 3 hours, that's more than usual. I touched the faint shadows under his eyes. "You need to rest. I rest when you're here." It should have been a line. It wasn't. It was just true. Footsteps on the stairs confirmed my prediction. Oliver appeared in the doorway seconds later, already dressed in the school uniform that still made my chest tight when I saw it, because it was evidence of a life I'd never imagined being able to give him. "Teo, you said you'd teach me more numbers today." Announced, climbing onto the bed without invitation or hesitation. "I did say that," Matteo agreed, shifting to make room, in Italian. "Yes. Can we count to 100? If you want." Oliver settled between us, with the contentment of a child who never doubted his place in this bed, in this apartment, in this life we'd somehow built together. Matteo caught my eye over Oliver's head. Something passed between us that didn't need words. Gratitude, maybe. Or just recognition that we'd gotten here despite everything. Later that morning, after Oliver left for school in the bulletproof car with the vetted driver, precautions that were permanent now, non-negotiable, I went upstairs to work. The threat from the Bratva had been resolved 3 months ago, in a way Matteo had explained in broad strokes but never in detail. I knew their leader was gone. I knew the territory dispute had been settled. I knew that Matteo had made it very clear what would happen to anyone who came near his family again. That he counted me and Oliver as family, had stopped being something he implied, and started being something he stated as fact. "My attorney called," he said, walking into the office at noon, with lunch he'd picked up from the Italian place downstairs. David's lawyer withdrew the custody petition. I looked up from the contract I was reviewing. "When?" "This morning, permanently. He signed an agreement giving you full legal and physical custody. He'll see Oliver twice a month, supervised, and that's only if Oliver wants to." I set down my pen carefully. "How did you make that happen?" "I made him understand that pursuing it further would be extremely unwise." "Matteo, I didn't threaten him, if that's what you're asking. I simply made sure his lawyer understood exactly how many resources I was willing to deploy to ensure he lost, badly, with financial and professional consequences." He set the food on my desk. He chose the sensible option. "Thank you," I said quietly. "You don't need to thank me for protecting my family." There it was again, my family, said like it was obvious, like I'd always been part of it. "Does Sophia know you say things like that?" I asked. "Sophia tells me I should have said it months ago." "She's not wrong." He smiled, actually smiled, which he did more now, but still rarely enough that it felt like a gift every time. "Eat. You skipped breakfast." I had coffee. "Coffee isn't breakfast. It is if you're efficient. That's not how nutrition works, Claire." We'd had this argument at least 50 times. I never won. Mostly because he was right, but also because I'd learned that letting Matteo take care of me made him visibly calmer, like he needed the ability to provide in order to prove to himself that I was staying. That afternoon, Sophia stopped by with her youngest, Lucia, who was 6 months old now, and who Matteo held with the careful competence of someone who'd done this before with his nephews. "You're coming to dinner Sunday," Sophia informed me, sitting on the couch with the ease of someone who'd claimed this space as partially hers through sheer force of will. "Aunt Valentina is making her pasta, the good one. She only makes it twice a year." I wouldn't want to impose. "You're not imposing. You're family. Matteo already confirmed you're coming." "Did he?" "An hour ago, in the group chat." She pulled out her phone, showed me the message thread that apparently included every Caruso within a 50-mile radius. Matteo's message, sent at 2 p.m. "Claire and Oliver will be there," followed by approximately 30 responses, ranging from approval to demands that I bring the tiramisu I'd made for the last dinner, which had apparently achieved legendary status. "When did I join the family group chat?" I asked Matteo, who was currently letting Lucia grab his tie while she gurgled happily. 2 months ago, he said. "You haven't checked it?" "I thought it was spam." Sophia laughed. "It's definitely spam, but it's family spam, so you have to read it." She left 20 minutes later, with Lucia, and a promise to text me the details for Sunday. Mateo and I were alone again in the apartment that had stopped being his and started being ours, without either of us formally acknowledging the transition. I should probably move my things up here officially, I said, instead of keeping clothes in 2 apartments. He went very still. Is that what you want? Is it what you want? I want you here. I've wanted you here since the night you called me at midnight, and I realized I'd give you anything you asked for without hesitation. The honesty of it took my breath away. Then yes, I said, that's what I want. That evening, we moved my things. It didn't take long. I'd been staying in Mateo's apartment more nights than not for weeks. The apartment downstairs had become mostly storage and a place for Oliver to keep his toys spread out in the living room. We'd convert it into something else eventually. Office space, maybe, or keep it for when Sophia's kids visited and needed somewhere to play that wasn't directly underfoot. We'd figure it out. That was the luxury of time and stability, and knowing we were building something permanent. Later, after Oliver was asleep in the bedroom we'd set up for him on the 2nd D floor, the one next to ours, close enough that we could hear if he had nightmares, Mateo and I sat in his office. Our office now, I supposed. He was at his desk, reviewing something on his laptop. I was curled in the leather chair by the window, with a book I was pretending to read, while actually just watching him work. You're staring again, he said without looking up. You're very watchable. That's not a word. It is now. He closed the laptop, looked at me properly. Come here. I set down the book, crossed the room, let him pull me into his lap, settling against him with the ease of practice. I have something for you, he said. You give me things constantly. You don't need to give me more things. This is different. He reached into his desk drawer, pulled out an envelope, the same cream-colored stationery he used for the letters he wrote. Read it. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a letter, handwritten in his precise script. It said, Claire, when I saw you in that parking lot 6 months ago, I recognized something I'd spent years forgetting how to see. Someone who deserved more than she'd been given. Someone who fought, despite having every reason to give up. Someone who loved her son enough to destroy herself trying to save him. I wrote you a letter that night, then another, then a dozen more, trying to find the right words to explain why a stranger would offer help to someone he didn't know. I never found the right words, so I stopped trying to explain and simply acted. You came into my life when I'd stopped believing that anything could change, when I'd accepted that my world was what it was and that certain things, family, love, permanence, weren't meant for people like me. You proved me wrong. You and Oliver gave me something I didn't know I was missing. A reason to come home. A reason to be better than the version of myself I'd become. I'm not a good man. I've done things I can't undo, and made choices I'll carry forever. But I'm trying to be good for you, for him, for the family we're building. I love you. I should have said it weeks ago, months ago, maybe from the beginning. I'm saying it now. You deserve more than this life can offer. But if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of mine trying to give it to you anyway. Yours, Mateo. I read it twice, then a third time because my eyes were blurring and I needed to make sure I hadn't imagined it. When I looked up, he was watching me with an expression that was careful and vulnerable and entirely open. You wrote this tonight? I asked. 3 weeks ago. I've been carrying it around trying to decide when to give it to you. What changed? You said you wanted to move your things upstairs, and I realized I'd been waiting for permission I didn't need because you'd already given it every time you stayed. I set the letter on the desk, turned in his lap so I was facing him properly, put my hands on either side of his face. I love you too, I said. I've loved you since you brought me coffee the first week I worked here, and somehow knew exactly how I took it. I've loved you since you taught Oliver to count in Italian. I've loved you since you sat on his bed at 2 a.m. and sang him to sleep, because I couldn't. I kissed him softly. I love you now. I'll love you tomorrow, and every day after that. He kissed me back. Not urgently, not desperately, just thoroughly. Like we had all the time in the world, and he planned to use it. When we finally pulled apart, he pressed his forehead against mine. Stay, he said quietly. Not just tonight, not just this week. Stay. I'm not going anywhere, I whispered. I promise. His arms tightened around me, and I knew, with the kind of certainty that didn't require proof, that I was finally home. 3 months later, Sophia took a photo at Sunday dinner that she'd later frame and give to us as a Christmas present. In it, Mateo was holding Oliver, who was demonstrating something with his hands that involved a dinosaur story only he understood. I was laughing at something Aunt Valentina had said. Sophia's boys were in the background stealing cookies from the counter. We looked like a family. We were a family. The apartment in Queens was a memory now. David was a name Oliver mentioned occasionally without weight. The credit card debt was paid off. The fear that had lived in my chest for so long had finally gone quiet. I still worked for Mateo, still reviewed his correspondence, and translated his contracts, and managed the parts of his life that didn't require violence or moral complexity. But mostly, I just lived, with a man who'd seen me at my lowest and decided I deserved more, with a son who called him Teo and believed absolutely that he'd always be safe, in a life I'd stopped trying to deserve and simply accepted as the gift it was. The letter Mateo had written me that night, the one that started with "You deserve more than this," stayed framed on the wall in our office. Some mornings I'd catch him looking at it. "What are you thinking?" I'd ask, and he'd pull me close and say that I was wrong. About what? You didn't deserve more than the life you had. You deserved everything, and I'm trying every day to give it to you. He was succeeding. We both were. And that finally was enough.